Be me, 34-year-old woman, married to my husband James for 6 years, together for 9. Good job, nice house in the suburbs, no kids yet, because I wanted to focus on my career first. Everything was fine until about 3 years ago when I had this realization. I was reading this book about emotional labor, and it just clicked. Women are always expected to perform for men, to be available, to meet their needs. Our bodies are treated like they belong to someone else the moment we say I do. I started thinking about how society conditions women to believe that marriage means sexual availability, that we owe our husbands access to our bodies. And I realized that this was just another form of oppression I had internalized. So I decided I needed to reclaim my bodily autonomy. I needed to establish that intimacy would happen on my terms, when I wanted it, not because of some societal expectation. It wasn't that I didn't love James. I did love him, but I needed him to love me for me, not for what I could provide physically. The first time I really put my foot down was on our anniversary. He had made this whole romantic dinner, candles, the works. Afterward, he tried to initiate, and I just stopped him. I explained calmly that I wasn't comfortable with the expectation that romance equals sex, that I needed him to respect my boundaries. He looked confused and hurt, but I held firm. This was important, establishing that I was a person with agency, not just a wife. He asked if something was wrong, and I said no, nothing was wrong. I was just choosing not to engage in physical intimacy at that moment, and that should be okay. That should be respected. He backed off, but he seemed really dejected the rest of the night. Over the next few weeks, he tried a few more times. Each time I explained that I wasn't obligated to perform intimacy. That consent isn't just about saying yes or no in the moment. It's about dismantling the expectation altogether. I needed him to understand that I wasn't a sexual object. Around month 2, he sat me down for a talk. He said he was feeling disconnected from me, that physical intimacy was important to him for feeling close. I told him that was exactly the problem. Why did he need physical intimacy to feel close to me? Why couldn't emotional intimacy be enough? This was just patriarchal conditioning making him believe he was entitled to my body. He got frustrated and said it wasn't about entitlement. It was about connection and love and desire. I said desire was just another word for objectification. Real love should be unconditional. He should love me whether we were physical or not. He asked how long I planned for this to go on. I told him I didn't know, until I felt like the power dynamic had been rebalanced, until I felt like he truly respected my autonomy. He looked defeated but said, okay. That conversation should have been enough, but he kept trying. Not just sex, but other stuff too. He'd try to hold my hand on the couch, and I'd pull away, because it felt like a gateway, like he was trying to soften me up. Every touch felt like it had an ulterior motive. When he'd try to kiss me goodnight, I'd turn my head, offer my cheek instead if anything, because I needed to establish clear boundaries. I wasn't going to be guilted or seduced into compromising my principles. He'd look sad every time, but that was his issue to work through. His sadness was rooted in his expectations, and those expectations were the problem. Around month 4, he suggested couples counseling. I said, absolutely not. Therapy would just be another person telling me I needed to be more available. Another voice reinforcing patriarchal expectations about wives and their duties. I'd seen it before, therapists calling it compromise when really they meant women should give in. He said we could find a progressive therapist. I said it didn't matter. The institution of marriage counseling was built on traditional gender roles. I wasn't going to pay someone to tell me to submit to my husband's desires. He dropped it, but I could tell he was upset. Work was going well, though. I got a promotion around month 6. James congratulated me, but there was this distance in his voice. I expected him to be happier for me. He still did his share around the house, still contributed financially. We had combined finances, and neither of us ever fought about money. He'd cook dinner, do the dishes, ask about my day. But there was this wall between us now. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with this expression I couldn't read. Sad, angry, I wasn't sure. My coworker Amanda asked if everything was okay at home. She said I seemed stressed. I confided in her about what I was doing. She was supportive, said it was important to establish boundaries, that too many women lose themselves in their marriages. That made me feel validated. I was doing the right thing, even if it was hard, even if James didn't understand yet. Around the 1-year mark, he tried to talk to me again, said he was struggling, that he felt like we were roommates. I told him that was his choice. I was still emotionally available, still his wife in every way that mattered. If he couldn't see that, if he couldn't value me beyond physical intimacy, that was on him. He asked point blank if I was ever planning to be intimate with him again. I said I didn't appreciate the pressure, that asking that question was itself a form of coercion. He was trying to get me to commit to something to meet his needs. What about my needs? My need to feel like a whole person, not just a body. He went quiet after that, just nodded and walked away. After that conversation, he stopped trying as much, stopped initiating anything physical at all, stopped with the romantic gestures, too. No more surprise flowers or date night suggestions. I figured he was finally learning to respect my boundaries, finally understanding that I didn't need those performative displays. Year 2 was weird. We coexisted, but it felt different. He was polite, cordial, even, still did his part with everything. But there was no warmth. Sometimes I missed the warmth, but I reminded myself this was necessary. This was about breaking down conditioning, his and mine. I couldn't give in just because it was uncomfortable. Change is always uncomfortable. My mom asked about grandkids during year 2. I said we weren't ready yet. She gave me this look and asked if everything was okay in my marriage. I got defensive and said everything was fine, that not every marriage looks the same, that James and I had our own understanding. She dropped it, but she seemed concerned. I called my sister later to vent, told her about what I was doing and why. She was less supportive than Amanda. Said 3 years seemed like a long time, that maybe I should communicate better with James about what I needed. I said I had communicated. I'd been very clear about my boundaries. It wasn't my job to also manage his feelings about those boundaries. She said marriage was partnership. I said partnership doesn't mean sexual servitude. We kind of argued and I hung up frustrated. Why couldn't anyone understand what I was trying to do? Year 3 started and James was like a ghost. He was there but not there, still doing everything he was supposed to do, but he barely talked to me beyond logistics. Who was picking up groceries when the utility bill was due, that sort of thing. I tried to engage him in deeper conversations sometimes, about my work, about politics, about things I was reading. He'd listen politely and give short responses, then excuse himself to go to the gym or work on something in the garage. He'd started going to the gym a lot, and spending more time with his friends, which was fine. I believed in independence within marriage. But sometimes I felt lonely. I'd think about asking him to stay home and spend time with me, but then I'd remind myself that I couldn't demand emotional intimacy while refusing physical intimacy. That would be hypocritical, even though they were different things. I pushed through the loneliness, told myself this was part of the process. Around month 30, I noticed he'd been staying late at work more. Came home one night and could smell perfume on him. My heart dropped and I asked him about it. He said he'd been at a work event, lots of people there. He wasn't defensive, just matter of fact. I wanted to accuse him of something, but I had no proof. And part of me knew I had no right. But I was still his wife. He still owed me faithfulness, even if I wasn't being physically available. Those were the vows, in sickness and health. This was just a different kind of health. Emotional health, my health. I let it go, but it bothered me. Month 32, he asked if we could talk, sat me down very formally. I thought maybe finally he was going to tell me he understood, that he'd worked through his entitlement issues. Instead, he asked me again about counseling, said he thought we really needed it, that he was trying to understand but he couldn't keep living like this. I felt my defenses go up immediately. Told him the same thing I'd said before, that counseling would just reinforce oppressive structures, that if he truly loved me, he wouldn't need sex to feel connected. He asked if I even wanted to be married to him. I said of course I did. Marriage was about commitment, about partnership. He said it was also about intimacy, and I'd completely cut him off. I said intimacy meant more than just sex. He said it wasn't just about sex, it was about all of it. The touching, the affection, the physical closeness. That I'd rejected all of it for almost 3 years. I told him I needed space to reclaim myself, that I needed to know he valued me as a person. He said quietly that he'd always valued me as a person, but that I'd never asked him how he felt about any of this, never asked what he needed, just made a unilateral decision about our entire relationship. I said it was my body and therefore my decision. He nodded slowly and said he couldn't argue with that. Then he got up and went to bed. I sat there feeling weirdly unsettled, but I pushed it away, reminded myself I was standing up for myself. Month 34, early on a Saturday morning. I was having coffee in the kitchen. James came in dressed nicely, said he was going to meet a friend. He seemed calm, almost peaceful. I thought things might be getting better. He was accepting the situation, learning to live with my boundaries. Maybe we were turning a corner. He came back a few hours later. I was in the living room reading. He walked in and handed me an envelope. I asked what it was. He said I should just read it. I opened it and saw the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." My brain couldn't process it at first. I read it again. Divorce papers. He was divorcing me. I looked up at him in complete shock, asked what this was supposed to be. Some kind of threat? A manipulation tactic? He said no. It was real. He'd filed for divorce. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Asked him why, what had happened. He just looked at me with this tired expression, said I'd rejected him completely for 3 years, that he'd tried everything he could think of, tried to talk to me, tried to suggest help, tried to understand, but that I'd made it clear this was how our marriage was going to be, and he couldn't live like that anymore. I stood up, papers falling to the floor, told him he couldn't just leave. We were married, we made vows. He said I'd broken those vows 3 years ago when I decided we would no longer have a real marriage. I said we did have a real marriage. We lived together, shared finances, shared a life. He said we were roommates who shared expenses, that he'd stayed faithful, kept trying, kept hoping, but that I'd never once considered what this was doing to him, never once asked if he was okay. I felt panic rising. Told him this was ridiculous. We could work through this. He said he'd asked me to work through it for 3 years and I'd refused. I said I just needed more time. He said he didn't have any more time to give, that he was 36 years old and he wanted a full life, wanted partnership, intimacy, connection. And I'd made it clear that wasn't what I wanted with him. I told him he was being selfish, that marriage was supposed to be unconditional. He said marriage was a partnership, and I'd opted out of my part while expecting him to maintain his. That wasn't unconditional love, that was servitude. I didn't know what to say to that. He picked up the papers and put them back in the envelope, told me to get a lawyer, that he'd be staying at a friend's place. He'd packed a bag already, it was in his car. Then he just left. I stood there in shock for probably an hour. Couldn't believe this was happening. He couldn't actually be serious. This was just a dramatic gesture. He'd come back. He had to come back. But he didn't come back that night or the next night. I called him and he answered very formally, said we should only communicate through lawyers from now on. I asked if we could just talk. He said we'd had 3 years to talk and I'd shut down every conversation. Then he hung up. I called Amanda crying, told her everything. She was sympathetic, but even she seemed a bit uncertain. Asked how long it had been since we'd been intimate. I said 3 years, but that wasn't the point. The point was, he'd given up on our marriage. She went quiet, and then asked if maybe I should have gone to counseling. I felt betrayed, told her I thought she understood. She said she understood setting boundaries, but 3 years was a long time. That maybe I'd taken it too far. I hung up feeling angry and alone. Called my sister next. She was less sympathetic, said she wasn't surprised, that she'd wondered when he was going to finally leave. I asked what she meant. Why would she assume he'd leave? She said because I'd essentially ended the marriage 3 years ago, that he'd just made it official. I told her she didn't understand, that this was about autonomy and respect. She said it was about me making unilateral decisions and expecting him to just accept it. That relationships required compromise, and I'd refused to compromise at all. I asked her whose side she was on. She said there were no sides, just a failed marriage, and that maybe I needed to take some responsibility for my part in it. I hung up on her too. My mom called later that week after my sister told her. She was gentler, but essentially said the same thing, that marriage required give and take, that intimacy was part of marriage and I'd withheld it for years. I tried to explain my reasoning about bodily autonomy. She said she understood autonomy, but that I'd also made a commitment, that if I didn't want a traditional marriage, I should have communicated that before getting married, not unilaterally change the terms 3 years in. I told her. It wasn't about traditional or non-traditional, it was about respect. She asked if I'd respected James and his needs. I didn't have a good answer for that. The divorce process started moving forward. His lawyer sent paperwork. I got my own lawyer who asked me to explain the situation. I told her everything. She listened carefully and then asked if there was infidelity or abuse. I said no, nothing like that. She asked what the grounds were. I showed her his filing, which cited irreconcilable differences and breakdown of the marriage. She asked how long we'd been separated. I said we weren't separated, we lived together until he served me papers. She asked about the last time we'd been intimate. I said 3 years, but that was my choice. She gave me this look, asked if I'd refused all intimacy for 3 years. I said yes, as was my right. She agreed it was my right, but then said he also had the right to leave a marriage that wasn't meeting his needs, that no-fault divorce existed exactly for situations like this. I asked if we could fight it. She asked on what grounds. I didn't know what to say. She told me gently that my best option was to negotiate a fair settlement, that fighting it would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. I felt everything crumbling, went through the motions at work but couldn't focus. My manager asked if everything was okay. I said I was going through a divorce. She was sympathetic, asked if there was anything she could do. I said no, just needed time. She asked what happened if I wanted to talk. I started to explain about boundaries and autonomy, but halfway through I realized how it sounded. She was nodding politely, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. I stopped talking and just said it was complicated, tried to reach out to some friends, posted vaguely on social media about going through a hard time, got the usual supportive comments, but when I explained to people one-on-one what happened, the support dried up. Everyone seemed to think I was in the wrong, that 3 years was too long, that I should have communicated better, that I should have tried counseling, that marriage was about compromise. I felt so alone and misunderstood. Didn't anyone understand what I was trying to do? I was standing up for women everywhere, refusing to be reduced to a sexual object, reclaiming my body and my choices. But apparently, that didn't matter. Apparently, I was just supposed to perform my wifely duties. James came by one day to get more of his stuff. I tried to talk to him, asked him to reconsider, said maybe we could try counseling now. He stopped packing and looked at me, asked why now. Why was I willing to try now when I'd refused for 3 years? I said because I didn't realize he'd actually leave. The words were out before I could stop them. He nodded slowly, said that was exactly the problem, that I'd never taken his needs seriously, never thought there would be consequences, just expected him to wait indefinitely while I worked through whatever I was working through, without ever including him in the process. I said I needed to do it on my own. He said marriage wasn't about doing things on your own. It was about partnership, and I'd shut him out completely. He finished packing and left, didn't even look back. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. He didn't ask for much, just a fair split of assets, didn't try to take the house or screw me over financially, was actually very reasonable about everything, which somehow made it worse. If he'd been cruel or vindictive, I could have painted him as the bad guy. But he wasn't. He was just done. I'm living in the house alone now. He moved across town. I heard through mutual friends. Apparently he's already dating someone. That hurts more than I want to admit. Not because I want him back exactly, but because it feels like I didn't matter. Like 3 years of marriage meant nothing. I've been trying to process everything. Went to therapy finally, a feminist therapist. Thought she'd validate my choices, but even she gently suggested that boundaries need to be communicated and negotiated. That healthy relationships involve considering your partner's needs alongside your own. I told her I was considering my own needs for the first time. She said that was important, but that I'd done it at the exclusion of everything else. That I'd set a boundary, but never explained what I was working toward. Never gave him a timeline or included him in the journey, just expected him to accept it indefinitely. I'm starting to see maybe I handled it wrong. Not the boundary itself, but how I implemented it. But I'm still not sure I was wrong about the core principle. Shouldn't I have the right to control my own body without consequences? Shouldn't he have loved me enough to wait? Shouldn't marriage mean accepting your partner even when things are hard? My therapist says marriage is a two-way street, that both people have to be getting their needs met, and I'd made sure my needs were met while completely ignoring his. I'm trying to understand, but it's hard. I spent 3 years convinced I was doing the right thing, standing up for myself, refusing to be objectified, and now I'm divorced and alone, and everyone seems to think it's my fault. Maybe some small part of me is starting to agree, but I can't fully accept it. Because accepting it means accepting that I destroyed my marriage, that I drove away someone who loved me, that I was so caught up in my principles that I forgot about the actual person I was married to, and that's too painful to fully process. So I'm sitting here in this house we bought together, surrounded by furniture we picked out as a couple, trying to understand where it all went wrong. He says it went wrong 3 years ago when I cut him off. My therapist suggests it went wrong when I refused to communicate or compromise. My friends and family seem to agree, but I still don't fully get it. I had a right to my boundaries. Had a right to my body. I had a right to say no. Why did exercising those rights cost me my marriage? Why wasn't my autonomy enough? Why did there have to be intimacy for the marriage to survive? These are the questions I keep asking, but I'm not getting answers that satisfy me. Or maybe I'm getting answers and refusing to accept them. Maybe that's been the problem all along, refusing to accept anything that doesn't fit my worldview. I don't know anymore. All I know is I'm 34, divorced, and completely lost. I thought I was fighting for something important, thought I was standing up for myself, thought I was refusing to be reduced to my body, but instead I reduced my marriage to a battleground. And I lost. He's moved on already, and I'm still here trying to figure out what happened, trying to understand how 3 years of holding firm to my principles led to me sitting alone in an empty house, signing divorce papers, and wondering if maybe everyone else was right. But I can't quite admit that yet, can't quite accept that I was wrong, because if I was wrong about this, what else might I be wrong about? And that's too much to face right now. So I just sit here, confused, angry, hurt, betrayed, convinced on some level that I was right, but unable to explain why being right feels so much like losing everything.